Story 1. The vanishing neighbor. I used to live next door to an elderly woman who always waved at me from her porch. She had kind eyes, a garden full of flowers, and a cat that never left her side. Her name was Mrs. Hargrove, and she seemed harmless, but a bit lonely. We talked occasionally, usually when I collected the mail or took out the trash. Everything seemed normal until one unsettling night. I was up late studying when I heard frantic knocking on my window. Startled, I froze, then cautiously peeked through the blinds. Mrs. Hargrove was outside in her nightgown. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. She was mouthing something, but I couldn't hear her over the rain. Before I could open the window, she turned and ran into the darkness. The next morning, I went to check on her. Her house was silent. The garden was overgrown, and the windows were dusty. I knocked, but there was no answer. Concerned, I called the landlord. He looked confused when I mentioned her name. "Mrs. Hargrove?" he asked. "There's never been anyone by that name living there." He showed me records proving the house had been empty for years. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something I wasn't meant to. Sometimes I dream of her face at my window, desperate and terrified. I wonder if she was trying to warn me, or if she needed help I couldn't give. Even now, her empty porch makes me uneasy, as if her story isn't over. Story 2. The Whispering Mirror. I found an antique mirror at a flea market. It had ornate carvings that looked like rippling waves. The seller said it was from the 1800s and had a unique history. I bought it and hung it in my bedroom. That night, I noticed the room felt colder, and faint whispers came from the mirror. They stopped when I got close. At first, I thought I imagined it, but over the days, the whispers grew louder. They called my name. One night, I woke to a loud scream. My reflection was smiling, but I wasn't. It tilted its head, watching me. Terrified, I tried to cover the mirror, but the whispers grew angry. When I finally confronted it, the glass rippled like water. A hand pressed against the inside, clawing to get out. I smashed the mirror with a chair. The room went silent. Even though the mirror is gone, I still see that eerie smile in reflections. Windows, puddles, even other mirrors. I avoid reflective surfaces now, but I know it's still watching, waiting for another chance. Story 3. The Child in the Woods. While hiking in a forest, I found a barefoot child sitting by a tree. He was crying quietly. "Are you okay?" I asked. The child looked up, his face blank. "Don't follow me," he whispered. Then he ran into the forest. The child had no shoes, no coat, and it was getting dark. I followed his footprints, calling out. The forest grew darker. The trees seemed to close in, and the air felt heavy. I felt dread, but kept going. The footprints stopped at a clearing. In the center was an old cabin. Its door was open, and whispers came from inside. I stepped in. The room was empty except for a chair and a photo. The photo showed the child with a man whose face was scratched out. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. "I told you not to follow me," the child whispered. I turned, but no one was there. I ran until I found the trail. When I told a ranger, his face went pale. "You're not the first to see that child," he said, "but no child lives here." Story 4. The Late Night Caller. At 3 a.m., my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Curious, I answered. A deep voice whispered, "I'm outside." My heart raced as I checked the window. The street was empty. I hung up, but the uneasy feeling stayed. The calls continued. Each time, the voice seemed closer. "I'm at your door. I'm in your hallway." One night, I heard my front door creak open. Footsteps followed. My phone buzzed. "I'm in your bedroom," the voice said. I froze, clutching the phone. A shadow moved in the corner. I felt cold breath on my neck. I turned on the light, but the room was empty. The calls stopped after that night, but I've never felt alone since. Sometimes in the silence, I hear whispers, reminding me that whatever called me is still out there. Story 5. The Phantom Passenger. One night I was driving home on a deserted road. It was late, and the fog was so thick I could barely see. A figure appeared on the roadside, waving for a ride. I hesitated but stopped. It was a man in tattered clothes. He got in, and we drove in silence. After a while, I asked where he needed to go, but he didn't answer. I glanced at him, and he wasn't there. My car felt cold, and the radio started playing static. Then a voice whispered, Thank you. The fog lifted, and I was alone again. Story 6, The Shadow in the Hallway. In my childhood home, I always felt uneasy in the upstairs hallway. Shadows seemed to move where they shouldn't. One night, I stayed up reading when I saw something dart past my door. Thinking it was my sibling, I called out, but no one answered. I stepped into the hallway and it was freezing. A shadow stretched across the wall, though there was no light to cast it. It moved toward me and I ran back to my room. For years, I avoided that hallway at night. Even now in my dreams, I see that shadow waiting. Story 7. The Room That Shouldn't Exist. While staying in an old hotel, I discovered a door at the end of the hall that wasn't on the floor plan. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside was a small, cold room with a single chair and a mirror. The air felt heavy. As I turned to leave, the door slammed shut. I banged on it, but no one heard me. My reflection in the mirror began to move on its own, smiling and waving. Hours passed before the door creaked open, and I stumbled out. When I looked back, the door was gone. Story 8. The Laughter in the Attic. After moving into a new house, I heard laughter from the attic at night. Thinking it was the neighbor's kids playing a prank, I ignored it. But one night, the laughter turned to sobbing. I decided to check. The attic was empty except for a dusty doll. Its head was turned toward the door. As I stepped closer, the sobbing stopped, and the doll's head turned to face me. I ran out and never went back up there. Even now, I hear faint laughter sometimes, as if it's waiting for me to return. Story 9. The Stranger at the Window. During a stormy night, lightning illuminated a figure standing outside my window. At first, I thought it was a tree branch swaying in the wind, but as the flashes continued, the figure stayed, motionless, staring in. It was tall and dark, its shape unclear against the rain, but its glowing eyes were unmistakable. My stomach churned as I realized it was watching me. I wanted to believe it was just a trick of the light, so I closed the curtains and tried to shake the uneasy feeling. But minutes later, I heard a faint tapping on the glass. My heart raced as I forced myself to peek through the curtains. The figure was still there, its hand pressed against the window, leaving a smudged outline. When I mustered the courage to check, armed with a flashlight, there was nothing there. The tapping had stopped, and the yard was empty. But on the glass, a handprint remained, much larger than my own. The storm raged on as I stood frozen, wondering how anyone could have disappeared so quickly. The next morning, I stepped outside to examine the area. Despite the heavy rain, I found muddy footprints leading away from the window. They were deep and deliberate, heading toward the woods at the edge of my property. The path ended abruptly, as if whoever or whatever had been there simply vanished into thin air. I haven't seen the figure since that night, but the memory of those glowing eyes still haunts me. On stormy evenings, I sometimes hear faint tapping again, but I no longer have the courage to look outside. The handprint on my window has faded, but the unease it left behind lingers, like a shadow that refuses to leave. Story 10. The Voice in the Voicemail. One day, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. It was faint, just static and a muffled voice saying my name. I deleted it, but it kept reappearing every morning with the same message. When I called the number back, a recording said, "This number does not exist." The call stopped after a month, but the unease lingered. A few weeks later, I heard the same muffled voice, not from my phone, but from the radio in my car. It said my name, and then static filled the speakers. One night, I woke to the sound of static from my living room. The TV had turned on by itself, and the faint voice called my name again. I unplugged the TV, but the sound continued, faint and persistent. The next morning, I found my phone on the kitchen counter, even though I had left it in my room. The voicemail was back. This time it said, "I'm here." Since then, I hear the voice in unexpected places. A passing car, a stranger's ringtone, even the hum of the fridge. It's as if it's following me, waiting for me to answer in a way I haven't yet understood. I've stopped deleting the voicemails. They keep coming, and I can't escape the feeling that one day I'll have to reply. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please subscribe for more videos.